I was very interested in synchronicity in my youth. That's sort of what got me started reading Jung. But the more time I spent reading philosophy, and especially philosophy of science relative to time, I came to realize that synchronicity, as presented by Jung, is not an explanation of anything. It's the name of a phenomenon, but it is no explanation. In fact, it tells you there is no explanation. The explanation is there is no explanation. It's simply synchronicity. P.W. Bridgman, in a book called The Theory of Natural Law, made a statement which has always guided me in this kind of model building. He said, a coincidence is what you have left over when you apply a bad theory. You see how that works? Yeah, you have to be able to perceive almost schizophrenically. You have to see, we were talking, his name has been bandied about this weekend, Philip K. Dick. What happened to Phil was that the resonance became stronger than the reality, or it became equal in strength, so that by squinting, he could see, 2nd century Rome. Everybody changed into people wearing togas and speaking Demotic Greek and everything. Well, that was the resonance of where he was at. But when the resonance comes forward with such strength that the foreground is displaced, they have a name for that. Buggo. And, you gotta watch that. On the other hand, if you can control it, it's a source of great richness and inner amusement, just to see, somebody comes scrambling up who needs their book signed, and you notice that, who you've got in front of you is Charlie Chaplin or Adolf Hitler or everyone has these people inside them, and they come and go on the surface. You aren't who you think you are. You aren't even who you think you aren't. It's very, very tricky, yeah. All cultures are embedded in this culture. On this island, you can find Amazonian Indians, you can find Sufi saints, you can find Satanists, it's all here, probably within walking distance of where we're sitting. Synchronicity, coincidence, all that stuff is very peculiar. The way in which perhaps by sharing our experiences, we can begin to satisfy ourselves that the domain we journey to and from is not merely mental. And the way in which we confirm for ourselves that it is not merely mental is in the observation of disturbances in this world that we call coincidental or synchronistic or something like that. Now, this is elusive, anecdotal kind of stuff, but nevertheless, there's enough of it that I think there is something there. What do I mean? What am I talking about? Well, as an example, I have lived 42 years. Only twice in my life have packages of matches burst into flame in my pocket. In each case, it was about 4 or 5 minutes before I turned somebody on to DMT. Well, now, yes, an interesting coincidence, totally non sequitur sort of thing, but twice in my life, packages of matches have burst into flames in my pockets. Other things, many people who experiment with mushrooms report it's almost achieved anecdotal status now. The scurryings and rustlings on the periphery. And when you do mushrooms fairly frequently, you get with this to the point where you just say, oh, that's the rats in the walls, the scratcher from hyperspace, whatever it is, because it's, you can't wrap your mind around it, but it's always there. And then less easily confirmed and communicated, but I'm sure we all have had this experience, is you will take a voyage into another dimension, be completely laid out on the floor for a long, long time, and then sit up. And at the moment that you sit up, the fire flares up, the logs fall through the grate, the coals burst into flame. In other words, there is a wave of regenerative activity that sweeps through the whole system. And people report playing with clouds. People report that after intense experiences, their lives are haunted by synchronicity. Well, psychologists get rid of this kind of anecdotal material with all kinds of semi-weaselly arguments, such as your clue-sifting intellect has been shifted from the background to the foreground. So now you are paying attention to the environment and it is giving you messages. And we all know that schizophrenics move into mental spaces where every license plate carries a message. And every headline is about them, and every conversation among the people they pass on the street is about them. But we all also know that we ourselves dabble with this, that this belief that the world is entirely independent of our minds and objective and unaware of us is the kind of scientific fiction in which we operate. And then the real truth that appears to our perceptions, the truth of our immediate experience, is that the mind is a concentric field of diminishing intensity that can draw events and circumstances far from the ranges of probability. I had the following experience. It's all anecdotal, you see. I was in a dry wash in the Negev desert, and there was absolutely no food, and I was a poor traveling hippie, a hashashin, and a cave dweller, and a ne'er-do-well, and it was like 120 degrees outside my cave, and I was sitting in front of my cave, smoking hash. And out through the shimmering heat, I could see this dot of a person. And as I watched them making their way through the rocks and the scrub, I began to have a fantasy about this person, that they had food, that they didn't simply have food, that they had oysters Rockefeller packed in ice, that they had Russian caviar, that they had Belgian chocolate, that they had all of this stuff. And, I hadn't had a bath in 3 weeks. There was barely any water in this place. And this speck made its way toward me, getting larger and larger. And finally, it turned into this guy I barely knew, a fellow lost soul. This was in southern Israel 25 years ago. And he came up to me and he said, I have oysters packed in ice. I have Belgian chocolate. And he had gotten a job dishwashing that morning at the King David Hotel and had just quit in disgust halfway through the day and had raided this super fancy 4-star hotel and just had a backpack full of this stuff. And I didn't even bother to tell him. What am I going to say, you know? I mean, sure, of course. So these kinds of things, and they're very private. You see, nothing happens there except that a guy quits his job and rips off a hotel, except that it is coincident with an internal state, a private musing of somebody else. And when the two things come together, the coincidence of it is absolutely excruciating. Kat had an experience. She's not here to tell it, but she went to Mexico when she was 19 and traveled all over Mexico and took LSD at a certain temple. And on the LSD trip in this place, she realized that she had been conceived there. And when she confronted her parents with it, it was so that she had been conceived there. Now, of course, you can say, well, in growing up, this must have been a story told around the dinner table, and then under LSD, the child brings it out. But sometimes these things just peels reality apart. The purest proof that I've ever had that goes against the clue-finding, integrative, unconscious thing, and really the time wave that we've spent so much time looking at is, in a sense, a net to trail through life. It's a coincidental engine. It causes there to be more coincidences in your life. And in fact, a way to let coincidence in your life is to let numbers into your life. The schizophrenic who looks at the license plates passing on the freeway is simply the lowest grade worshiper of numbers. But when you really let numbers into your existence, coincidence runs rampant. We have talked here a little bit about the most astonishing coincidence of all, which is that mathematics describes nature. That's a coincidence as far as I can tell. Why should it? No philosopher that I have ever read, no mathematician has ever been able to make it make cogent sense that the abstract operations of the human mind should somehow map over the core dynamics of nature. It's like a coincidence. When I was working with the time wave, the most perfect example of anticipation or disruption of ordinary flows of probability was I had this idea when I was working out the time wave. Before the 2012 date was chosen and settled on, way back in the early 70s, I discovered an odd coincidence, which went like this. It's embedded in a whole bunch of coincidences, but it goes like this. From the date of my mother's death till the time when I met the woman who went with me to La Chorrera, 64 days passed. From the time I met that woman till the actual experiment at La Chorrera, 64 days passed. From thence forward, 3 times 64 days later was my 23rd birthday. And looking at all these coincidences, I propagated forward into time, not 64-day increments, but 384-day increments. And I discovered something really interesting, which was when you went from my 23rd birthday, 384 days forward, no particular big deal. But when you went 384 days forward again, it landed on the winter solstice of 1973. And I thought that this was mildly interesting. And so then I looked in a naval observatory almanac, and I discovered that there was a total eclipse of the sun on this solstice, which I thought was pretty weird, and that this total eclipse of the sun would sweep across the Amazon, would only be visible from the Amazon basin, would be approaching totality as it swept across La Chorrera, and it would in fact achieve totality over the city of Belém in Brazil. Well, now, Belém is a Portuguese word which means Bethlehem. And I began to feel led. I began to feel as though I were being fed clues. So then I looked at the map, and you may do so as well, and you will see that the city of Belém in Brazil, the city of Bethlehem, is situated in the delta of the Amazon. Well, I'm Joyce scholar and river freak enough to know that all rivers are female, and if you're too dense to know that, certainly the Amazon River is female, because it is named the Amazon. I mean, Gaia is what it is, and Amazon is a giant woman. Well, here in her vulva, literally in the delta, and delta, you see, is this triangular, the Greek letter delta is a triangle and has been a schoolboy symbol for the female genitals for 18,000 years. In the delta of the Amazon sits the city of Belém, over which on a certain winter solstice, a total eclipse of the sun will appear. And I said, my goodness, this is the stuff of prophecy, something marvelous. It must be going to happen there. And, you must know Yeats' poem, what's it called? The Second Coming, the one about what rough beast slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. And it is an apocalyptic image, an image of the shift of the aeon. So I had all this data, pointing at December 23rd, 1973. But I got this same argument from people, this argument that you must have known, you must have seen these astronomical ephemerides at some time in the past, you must have an unconscious photographic memory, the mind must be a computer at some level, and so forth and so on. But what clinched it for me was early in 1973, still 11 months before this much anticipated moment, I opened the San Francisco Chronicle one morning, and it says, long period comet headed toward Earth. And I closed the newspaper and said aloud, I know that this comet will make its closest approach to the sun on December 23rd. Then I open the paper and read it. It says, yes, it will approach perihelion on the 22nd of December, give or take, so many hours Greenwich. And then I saw, for me, that did it. Because what it was a perfect proof. My wish had been granted. Because you see, no human being on Earth knew that this comet existed or had ever known, because it was a long period comet. It had never in historical times been in the skies of Earth. When I had focused in on this date using all these clues, it was absolutely in the value dark dimension. It was not in the collective unconscious, unless the collective unconscious anticipates the future. And if that's the case, then there's no way to contaminate any experiment from influence. So, the mushroom was willing enough to provide for my edification this thing. Well, but then see what happens. You may remember this comet. It was the comet Kohoutek, and it was an excuse for all kinds of falderall. I mean, harmonic convergence, eat your heart out. This was a much bigger deal. And yet this comet, which physically should have blossomed out into the most spectacular comet of all human history, was a dud. And once again, you know, prophets ate it right and left. And booksellers were left with vast unsold inventory. So to me, it's like play. It's like a joke. It's like if that doesn't seem like a joke to you, then you don't have a sense of humor. You know, it's not going to hand over your alchemical gold, because after all, why should it? Who are we to be the recipients of alchemical gold? But it does tease, and it does play. And I think if you're playful enough, you can coax it into being your playmate, and perhaps in these boundary dissolved states, this is what happens.